For this demo, we're going to make a interactive gallery space using Wonderland Engine. We're going to put a photograph, so it's projected onto a model or any sort of art, not necessarily photograph. And here I'm going to teleport it close, maybe not so close. I'm going to make it so that we can grab and throw things around if we don't like them. We'll be making this interactive gallery with a combination of Blender, where we will make our assets and set them up correctly, and then set up all our interactions using Wonderland Engine and exporting to WebXR.
So here we are with our scene in Blender. See, we have this very simple scene here. We have this cube-shaped room with material view. We have this cube-shaped room. We have kind of this funky lamp set up in the scene. We've got this table, and then we have the picture on cylinders. Now, if I go into render mode, you can see that this spotlight does seem to be functional. We're actually not going to use this light element. We'll use a Wonderland Engine's own light element for this, but it helps us see kind of the potential of what we can do with a light mounted in the light. So another little tip for easier orientation later, I have this light rotated 45 degrees on the x-axis, 45 degrees on the z-axis. So it'll be a very easy position to repeat when I'm putting a new into it. So you can see this light is actually not coming from the lamp itself. Back into material view. Here we can see our scene, and a really nice thing about Wonderland VR is we can export this whole scene as one GLB file, and it will come with the same hierarchy that we see in the outliner. So even after this is imported as one GLB, we'll still be able to move individual elements around, which is really great. But to make that even better, we're going to name things properly. So here you can see this table is just called cube. So we'll rename that to table. The room itself, is that what I have selected here? Let's see. Yeah, this room itself is just called cube 2. So we'll just call that cube room. So there's a cube shaped room. And then let's see what's cube 3 is the lamp, because we did model that from the cube 2. So we'll call that lamp. And then we can see we have CYL for cylinder, cylinder art, the name of all these cylinders here. So that's a pretty good name for those. So let's get into how we make this work. So to do that, I'm going to kind of reset these to their default setting. To make a row of cylinders, you can either just duplicate them and move them on the axis or x-axis or whatever and repeat them, or you can use an array modifier and then apply it. Right now, you can see we have multiple objects with multiple origin points. I'm going to select the middle one, shift select the rest of them, and then I'm just going to go ahead and search, and I'm going to choose the option join, so that these objects are all joined together into one object. And that way I can work on one material on them at the same time. And it'll help me out with the UV mapping, which you'll see in a moment. So now that I've done that, I'm going to switch to the shading editor. And here we'll create a new material. There's our new material. And we going to add an image there. So to do that, I'll just go to my image folder, and just for fun, I'm going to use a different image than we had in the beginning of the demo. So here, drop this image in, and you can see when we drop the image into the node view, it just turns it right into an image texture node, which is great. Now we just turn the color to base color, and this is not the effect we're looking for at all, but we're getting somewhere. So here, in this image editor, we should be able to look at our image. So this is the photo that we're trying to put on these cylinders right now. So to see how this maps onto the cylinders, we can actually click the drop down here and switch this from an image editor to a UV editor. And then we can kind of do all of this at the same time. I'm going to enlarge that a little bit. And I think that that is a good view. Something else that we can do that can be really cool when really tweaking this kind of thing is we can actually add a second 3D viewport and put that into material view as well. And that can let us look at it from two angles at the same time. We have different modes of projection. By default, because these were all duplicated from one cylinder, you can see they all just kind of have the same part of the image wrapping around them. So we can see that air conditioner repeating again and again and again. So if we just hit select all, you can see that all of them are just unwrapped right in the same space. So just to do this manually for a second, if I were to just grab this cylinder, and by the way, in edit mode, you can press L to just grab linked vertices. Now in the UV editor, you can see as I move this around, we'll see different parts of the image. So you can imagine that we could kind of slowly move these around and get it all lined up, and that would work, but it would also be kind of a silly way to do it. What we're going to do is we're going to press A for select all, and we're going to look at our image, our thing straight on the x-axis, and then I'm going to press U again, and we have this option, project from view. And you can see now it's kind of lined up the UVs perfectly right along there. But unfortunately, they're small, but that's no problem. We can just scale that up a little bit until we can see, and you can see our image starting to form right there. And you can go for the whole image, or you can kind of crop a section. That's up to you. I kind of like it like this so that our characters are kind of in dialogue. I also like that you can kind of see the second eye of the face. If I look, if I pivot around to the edge of the model here, we get like a really different view from there than we do at that angle, which I think is really cool. So I think that this we can say is done, and we can go back to layout mode. We can see our cylinders here. And the only thing is we might have an issue with the fact that these tops are are different. So we can either add a new material to them, or we can just change the UVs on the tops. Instead of adding another material, I'm actually going to just alter the UVs on the tops and bottom this time. So I'll go back into this shading view. Um, I'll select this circle. I'll select this circle, and then I'll press Shift G for select similar, and I'll choose coplanar. So we've got all our circles selected. Now I'm going to press U again, and I'm just going to click unwrap this time. And now you can see these circles are all over the place. And I'm just going to shrink them way down and then just kind of move them somewhere else in the scene where they're all black. I'll just put them on Nosferatu on Dracula's collar there. And now they're all kind of just dark at the top and the bottom. And it was done very easily. But going back into layout, look at the rest of the objects in our collection. There's a few other things I want to draw some attention to. So notice this lamp here, this component here was quickly built from a cone, and this component here was built from a cube, but they've been joined together into one piece. So we're going to separate that out so you can see. So here we have this lamp, this table. I'm going to just select all. I'm going to hit P for separate and separate by loose parts. Now you can see the top of the table is separate from the bottom. That's fine. It just means that when I'm in Wonderland VR, I'll have to remember to, or Wonderland Engine, sorry, it means I'll have to remember to click both things to move them around, because I don't think parenting will carry over from Blender into that. So if you want objects to easily move together, the trick is you want to make sure they're one mesh. These cylinders, on the other hand, we don't want to be one mesh, which they are right now, because we want them to all be separately grabbable. So I'll hit Tab for edit, A for select all, P for separate, and separate by loose parts. And go back into object mode. And you can see the cylinders are all separate, but notice even when I get this cylinder all the way to the side, the origin point is still in the middle. So let's select all the cylinders. And then we'll right click and go to set origin, origin to geometry. And now they all have their own origin points. Beautiful. I was going to stick this table back together, but it actually occurs to me that if the tabletop is separate from the base, that'll make it really easy for me to adjust the physics on it. So I'm just going to call this tabletop. and I will leave it as a separate object. Just keep in mind, if you were going to build something else in the scene that had components in it, like maybe we'll build a really primitive chair right now. All right. So if I want to bring this chair in right now, you can see in my outliner, this is called cube and cylinder. So what I would want to do actually is not rename it yet, but select the base of the chair, select the top of the chair, search, and choose the option join. So they become one object, and then rename that to chair. Cool chair. All right. So everything here is ready to export. We've got our scene. So we'll just hit file, export, oops, file, export, glyph. Here, we want to make sure that we're only including visible objects. In the data section, we want to apply modifiers, and that should be ready to go. So I'll just throw it right into my documents folder. All right, so we can export that glyph. One more asset that you may need to design your environment is a skybox, and this is pretty simple to make. There's a lot of different ways to do it. So here we are, we've just got a default scene in Blender. I'm just gonna go ahead and delete everything. I'm gonna go straight to render view. Actually, I will put one mesh back in here so you can see. We can tell there's a icosphere there, but we can barely see it because the only thing in the environment illuminating it is this gray light. Uh, if we go into the environment settings right here, the environment tab, you can see we can change this color and we can kind of see the thing more, but the contrast never gets better. So we have a lot of different functions. If we just switch to the color here, like one thing we can do is we can switch to a gradient texture, which immediately gives us more contrast. Um, this gradient is sideways, so not exactly what we want, but that can be adjusted. I'm not going to get into that just now. You can also replace your background with, for instance, a basic noise texture, kind of have just like all these random colors all around. But what's more useful is we actually have in Blender a built-in sky texture. And there's a few different versions of it. We've got the Nishida sky, the Promethean sky, and the Hosek will. The Nishida sky is by far the most accurate, and you'll get the best results with it if you actually switch your render engine to cycles, which you'll need to do for rendering anyway as a 360 image. And so this gives us a really nice sky. We can change the intensity, we can change the sun elevation, get kind of closer to a sunset. We can change how the scattering works in the air. We can kind of make it cleaner or more polluted, add dust. Cranking up the ozone should give us more blue in the sky. We get some really nice effects there. And you can see our object really looks kind of like it's lit by bright sun. I'm actually going to reduce the strength of this so we can see the sun a little bit better. Something else that can be handy is we can shade this to smooth and make it metal and zero roughness so we can actually see a reflection of our sky, which can give us a good sense of what we're working on. We can see kind of where the sun location is. So this is already great. You could have this as your skybox. You could add a camera. We bring it a little bit off the plane so it's at more human height. Switch that to panoramic, go rectangular, set your output settings to a decent resolution, 4000 by 2000, and then you can see right there we already have a pretty great HDRI. So we can make this a little bit better. We've got just like pure darkness underneath. So we could add a plane under here. So we could do that. We could add a plane in edit mode. We can make it significantly bigger. We can subdivide it. I'm going to just do 44 cuts. And when it's subdivided, you can see you can actually add this fractal effect and start to kind of like make the plane a little bumpy, which has kind of an interesting look to it. The other thing that can look really good, which is really simple to kind of just make some very quick terrain, is we can just quickly select a few bits here and there, turn on proportional editing, press G to grab, Z to rise, and then scroll up on the wheel to get that proportional editing to give us kind of a different size grab. And then you can hold down the control key, maybe deselect a few mountains, rise again. So here we have kind of the start of really low poly terrain. We can just add a subdivision modifier and shade it smooth. And now we kind of have some really simple terrain. And we can see again, if we go, the light is already going to cast across this from the sky. And if we go into camera view, now we've got like some hills and things. And a cool thing is if you think that it's too hilly, actually, a nice thing you can do is you can just go into edit and you can select all, press S for scale, Z for the Z axis. You can scale it down on the Z axis to kind of make the mountains higher or lower overall if you think it's too dramatic an effect. So there we've got our basic landscape. In shading, we could add a material for this. We could just keep it really simple. We could add a noise texture. We could add a color ramp. And on this ramp, and then give the two ends of the ramp sort of like brownish textures. You kind of get like some nice like bands on the mountains. We can change the scale of this, of course, and the detail level. You can see we're getting pretty good, just kind of random landscape here. Another thing we could add is we can add another ramp. This is getting a little fancier. We can take this same texture and stick it into a second ramp. We can add a displacement node. We can take this black and white noise and stick it into the height, and then stick the displacement into the displacement over here. And now you can see we even have a little bit of nice texture. We can tweak that by altering the contrast. On the ramp here, we can create some interesting effects. And then of course, we can change the scale to make that more subtle. We could also go ahead and plug this same image into roughness. And that looks really gross and weird. But we can add an invert to that. So now we just kind of have like a little variability on the sheen. And we can go back to render view, camera view, and we've got this cool desert landscape. There's a lot of quick ways to make like a cloudy scene, a psychedelic scene. I'm just going to stop with this one right now. Just for time's sake, we're going to get a really quick render on this. So I'll limit the render to 5 seconds. And we'll render this out. And then we'll go to Wonderland Engine.
I'm going to save this equirectangular image as a JPEG for the small file size, but a PNG may actually be preferable so there are fewer compression artifacts.
So one of my favorite things about Wonderland Engine is that compared to other game editors, it opens and runs very quickly. There we go. Program is already up. We're going to create a new project here. I'll just call it demo one. We have choices here to start with an empty project, a default scene, a project with VR elements, and a project with mobile AR elements, which is in some ways the most exciting thing that this platform can do. But we're going to go with VR here, and we'll hit create. And here we are. We have this space. And this is already ready to go. So, we can quickly preview this. I'll pop it open in a web browser. And we can look around this scene. The teleport is sort of incorporated in the navigation, which is a little quirky. Layout of Wonderland Engine is actually very similar to other game engines, and the controls in the 3D space conveniently are very similar to Blender. So we can use the middle click or the right click in this case, but like Blender, we can use the middle click to rotate around. You can also do Shift and middle click to pan. If we select an object, you can see we have a little gizmo on it to move it around. But if you press S, you can switch to scale. Pulling from the middle gives you the whole thing. Pulling from one of the edges scales it on one axis. R gives you a rotate gizmo, and G brings you back to the move gizmo. So very similar to Blender in that respect. Here we have a few other elements. We have our player here. We've got all this great stuff built in here. There's both hand and controller tracking. So within an app like this, it's already baked in that if you want hand interactions, you can just put the controllers down. We also have this little kind of widget thing here. We got this widget thing here. You can look at the settings on it and kind of figure out whether you want to add more functionality to the button and whatnot. And then we have, a ground plane and a collider. Here on the left side, we've got our scene outline. One thing that I think is a little unintuitive in an otherwise intuitive program is to add elements to your scene. You actually right-click on root, and there's the option to add objects. So you can add meshes, lights, empties, inputs, etc. Down here, we have our asset library, very similar to programs like Unity. I really like this, we have JavaScript running here, so you can see kind of everything going on in commands form, so you can actually debug as you're working, which is really handy. And here we have the properties for various components. So before we get into building this, we're going to do a little housekeeping. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on View. We're going to turn on Project Settings. And then in the project settings, we're going to go down to Physics, and we're going to enable physics, because by default, this doesn't have physics in it. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to bring our assets into the asset browser. So here we have our whole scene put together in Blender. Just drop that right into the asset browser there. And we have our skybox, which I'll drop in as well. I also have kind of a psychedelic one I made for fun, but I don't think we'll use that. And then we have this folder here, which is Wonderland Engine JavaScript resource library with a lot of really useful scripts. And there's a link in the video where to download this. Inside this, we'll just keep going through the folders. Here, I'll do this so you can see the hierarchy until we get to JS. Then there's this folder in here labeled PP, which has all the key scripts in it. We're going to drag that folder right into our assets as well. Make those scripts something we can use. Here we have this option, add script. We also have this option to add folder in the project settings. So we'll add a folder. And because we've dropped it into our assets, there it is, PP. So click that once, add it, and you can see it's installed all these different animation and collision and input elements. Cube. I'll delete this sphere. I'll delete this cone. I'm also going to go ahead and delete this little button thing so we don't have to worry about that either. So we just have a few simple things in here. Something I will show you is if we add a mesh to our scene, you can see at first it's just a point, because to make the mesh visible, you actually have to, within the mesh component, add a shape to it, and you still don't see it until you add a material. So taking advantage of that, actually, I want to keep this walking plane, but I don't really need to see it. I'm going to, in the property section here, I'm actually going to just remove this physics component because I don't think we're going to need it here. We'll leave that collision component, so we have a place to walk. But here in the mesh for the material, I'm just going to switch it for none. And now we just have a collision plane. So we kind of just have a blank scene with two lights in it, and we're ready to actually import what we've built. So here we can drag this GLB right into our scene outliner, and you can see it's dropped everything in, and it all has the right names. So here, scroll out a little bit, you can see we've got the table, we've got our photographs on cylinders. We even have that kind of silly chair that I made very quickly. And because I put that chair together as one mesh, you can see it moves as one mesh in the scene, just chair, as opposed to the table, which I kept in two pieces, so we can actually select the table and the frame separately. And I kept the ceiling off this so that I could have more flexibility to move the lights around. So another nice thing about Wonderland Engine is it has a real-time rendering engine, so you can see as we move these lights around, they do move in the scene. There's probably a slightly better way to do this, but so I can see in my scene more easily, we have this kind of, it's called cube room. I'm going to go ahead and change the material to none so we can just see the room for a minute. Remembering that that was material 3. I'm going to go ahead and grab one of these lights. I'm going to move it into my lamp. That's positioned well inside the lamp. And now I'm actually going to go into the light settings on this, and I'm going to change it from a point to a spotlight. And to position my light, I'm going to select it and press R for rotate, or the rotate option here. And then here you can see with the snap settings, it's set to 30 degrees. I'm going to switch that to 15. And I'm just going to get this at an angle where I can see it clearly. And holding down the control key, we'll rotate it 45 degrees on one axis. And essentially just rotate that in 15 degrees increments, so it's pointing right in the same direction as the lamp, which looks great. So now here I can also change the intensity. So I'm going to change the intensity from 3 to 100, so you can see a lot more light coming out of it. And then I can also change the inner and outer angles of this to kind of make a softer light, so it's not really like a hard spotlight. Having set that light up, which was kind of the trickiest thing, I'm going to go back to the cube room before I forget, and I'm going to put the material back on that so I can see it again. So now we can see how that light is filling the room. We've got a nice spot on our objects. To add more light to the scene, I'm going to move this lamp to this corner of the room here. Maybe we'll look through the top so you can see what we're doing. Whoops, sorry, yeah, this mouse wheel is out of control. So we can move this lamp maybe around here. And I will brighten that up a little bit. And then we can press Control D to duplicate. And on Windows, Control D, on Mac, Command D to duplicate. And now we have two lamps. And I'm going to go ahead and in the light settings on this one, I'm going to make this one kind of reddish. And I'm going to make this one a little more cyan. So we kind of have mixed light tones just for fun. And then maybe I'll grab both these lights at the same time. I'll press Command D to duplicate them again. I'll bring them to this corner, and then I'll rotate them 180 degrees. So we kind of just have like that mix of different colored lights around the space. And then the last thing we can do for lighting is we're going to create our exterior using the skybox, and then we'll be finished with lighting. So to do that, we're going to go to View, and we're going to turn on Resources. In Resources, we're going to go to Material, and we'll go all the way down, and we'll create another material. So we have this new material down here, and we'll set that material to be a sky, and then we'll just drag our image right onto it. And it looks like nothing happened, but that should work just fine. We'll go back to Scene View, and then in Project Settings, we'll go to Rendering, we'll enable Sky. So we'll set our material to our new material for sky, and then for the texture, we can choose our skybox. And here you can see in the scene view, we have this desert scene all around. And the compression looks kind of high on this, so maybe I would switch this to a PNG instead of JPEG. But you don't really see it that much except if you're looking out the windows while you're inside the space. So having done that, we're now ready to set up our physics, and really this whole project is almost complete. Whoops. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select one of our pictures, and we'll go to Properties, and we will add a component, and that component will be Physics. And now we can press the Physics Simulate button, and you'll see that cylinder just falls right through. Right now, the collider by default on that cylinder is just this sphere, and we'll come back to that. So now on the tabletop, we're going to add a physics component to that too. And you can see that it's put, not only has it put a circular collider, but it's actually dropped it under the table because that's where the origin point of that mesh was in Blender. So if we press play again, it's still gonna pretty much, they're just both gonna fall. So we're getting there, we're getting there. So with the table physics, the first thing we wanna do is set that to static. So now we have a little bit of an improvement, at least just one thing falls through. We're going to set the shape of the physics from a sphere. We'll try first a box instead. And that's nice because we can resize that box on the various dimensions. So we can just see that for a second, and we can test that. And we can see now we've got something going on, but you can see that this sphere is interacting with this box, and that's really not giving us the effect we want. So we could resize this box to fit this tabletop perfectly, but we can also set this to convex mesh. And for the mesh, we can actually choose the mesh that was originally the table. So now you can see this is just going to hit the table perfectly. That's beautiful. And that's why I separated the tabletop from the base of this so that that would be easily accessible. And because the mesh for the tabletop also has an off-center origin point, we don't even need to worry about moving it around. So with some objects, again, making a capsule or a box shaped physics form can be good. So, here you can see you could have a box and sort of size it to fit this cylinder. And that actually does work pretty well. As you can see, we're getting some pretty good physics there. But even then, we can again just go to convex mesh, and we can go scroll down, and all these cylinders are exactly the same, so it doesn't matter which one we choose in this case, but if it was a specific mesh, you would want to match it. And now we have a physics mesh that really fits the cylinder perfectly, and when we simulate, you can see it lands, though it does kind of bounce and roll over. Let's try that again. Entertaining, but we want this to more or less land on the scene. So one thing we can do before we get into this is we can actually put these things closer to the table so they're not falling from a great height. So we might not need to alter the physics anymore. So yeah, you can see that's fine. But we could, if we needed to, we could affect bounciness and friction and stuff like that. So now that we have that physics, we can, I'm gonna have to check on the Mac if it's Control or Command. We can take this physics element and we can actually drag it to a different mesh. But you can see it's dragged it to a different mesh, but it has just moved it. It hasn't copied it. So to copy it, what we want to do is the same thing, but we'll hold the We'll try that one more time. The same thing, but we will hold the control key. Whoops, that was the option. Yeah, so you hold the control key. Got a little pokey there for a moment because I was pushing the command key because I'm used to that being interchangeable. And something that does seem a little pokey here, it's different on Windows. On Windows, it doesn't seem to matter when you press the control key. On the Mac, it seems like you want to start dragging it and then press the control key, and you can see that plus sign adding to it. We just keep adding those over so we don't have to set them every time. And let's see, they're so close together that they might all start knocking each other over when we drop on the table. Nope, a little jiggling, but otherwise that looks great. All right, so we've got our um, those things fall on the table. That's great. You can click on this floor plane here, and for the collision, let's zoom out a little so we can see. We're just going to change it so it is extends. You could make it exactly the size of the room, but it's just important that it's not smaller than the room. So I'll just bring it all the way out. And this actually might let the person step out to space a little bit, which would be kind of cool. Um, so this is looking good. The next thing we want to do is we want to move the player because it's good if you're facing the table, not showing up behind it. If we preview here, we can see that we don't even see that there's um, spheres and stuff in the space till we look around to see them. So, oh, and we're outside the desert. So just so we know right where we are in the space, here in this root section, we're going to select the player, and we're also going to select the player, and we'll shift and select the tracked space as well to make sure we have that, and we'll just move the player right here, and then we will rotate them, holding the control key to snap, 90 degrees, or maybe actually just for fun, we can rotate them a little bit off so it's a little more natural. And now you can see when we preview the scene, you start right there. So you can see the piece of art, you're ready to go. So the last thing we need to do is we need to make things grabbable so we can pick them up and throw them around and stuff. And to do that, we're going to use these scripts that we've added. So we'll go into, we'll have our properties tab selected here. And then in our scene outliner, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to right click on root and we're going to add an empty object. And in the property section, we're going to call that empty object scene or scene one or whatever you want, but naming it correctly will make things easier for reasons that will soon be apparent. And then we're going to select player. We're going to select lights. We're just selecting everything in our scene. We're going to drag it down and pop it into scene. So it's all in there now. So to set these grabbable scripts to work, essentially we need to have a script on the whole scene. We need to have a script on each grabbable object, and we need to have a script on our controllers so we can use them to grab with. So that's what we're going to do right now. So for the scene, we're going to add a component, and that component is going to be called a gateway. So there it is, PP gateway. And that component is added. We don't have to go into a text editor because it has this great drop-down setup. So for the scene, we can search here. Luckily, we can just add our scene. For the player, we add the player. For the reference space, that one's a little confusing. It's not the same name. That is this over here. So the reference space is the tracked space. Non-VR camera is an on-VR camera. Most of these things are named correctly. Left eye is the left eye camera. Right eye is the right eye camera. At the left hand, right hand, head. And we don't actually need to add anything after that. So the reason we have to add these things in manually is In this case, we've been, really diligent to name these things appropriately. So, you know, the left eye is called eye left, and the head is called the head, etc. Um, but you can actually name this stuff whatever you want, and then put it in the drop down menus accordingly. I'm not sure if there's any merit to that, but nevertheless, you can. So now let's make these objects grabbable. So that's pretty easy. So here we'll select the first cylinder, and we're going to add a component. Um, and actually, I'm not going to select the first cylinder in view. You can see the order might, well, it looks like the order is okay. I guess like the first one in the list. I don't know why these got spaced out from each other, but I'm not going to drag it around now because I don't want to accidentally parent something. So here we have the first um, cylinder art1 selected, and we'll go and we'll add a component, and we'll just search grab, and there it is, PP grabbable. And there are a few settings on this, but we don't even really need to worry about that. So we can take this and drag it over, hold down the control key, add that same script to the other cylinders. Okay, so then the next thing we want to do is, where's our player? Right on there, okay. The next thing we want to do is in this scene outliner, we've got track space, and then you can see we have controller left and controller right. So we'll click controller left, and we need to add a few things to this. So the first component we're going to add is a physics component so that the hand can collide with things. And we'll keep this one as a sphere, that's fine. But we're going to set the radius from 0.2.5 down to 0.1. So it'll be a smaller slider on that. And then here, these collision simulation settings, we want to turn on trigger and kinematic so that it only interacts with things that we actually mean to. We'll just leave the explanation at that for now. And we can go ahead and drag this physics element to the other hand. So drag physics, hold down control, and there we've got the physics onto the other controller. Sorry, I said the other hand, I meant the other controller. So now the next component we will add is we will search grab, and there's PP grabber hand. And we have to set that to the right side. So you can see the correct side, I mean to say, because the right side is the left side. So that's set to left. And then we'll select the right hand controller, and we'll add it, and I'll type grab again. And there it is, PP grabbable. And this time we'll open that up. And, oh, whoops, mistake. Delete that, add component, PP grabber hand, and we will set that to the right hand. And there we go. This is completely done now, and we can just go ahead and view it in VR and interact with it. To view it in VR, once you've finished working on your scene on Mac or PC, you can simply plug in a Quest headset, choose, agree within the headset to the scene, and choose your MetaQuest in the drop-down menu and hit play. And here you can see that the VR environment will originally just come up as a website. We can reload that to start the physics again if they're shaking around. I don't know why that happens. Let me just click on VR. And there we are inside the space. So we can teleport right over here. And I can teleport a little closer. I can grab these spheres and knock them over. I should include physics in the floor so they don't fall through.
Most game engines only allow for VR headsets to be attached with Windows machines with RTX graphics cards. So the fact that this works essentially universally on any Windows or Mac is, I think, very exciting. Um, so anyway, that's how we put this together, and I'm excited to see what you guys all put together. Thanks.